The third story came harder than the first two. Vexathala stood silent for nearly a minute, his alien features twisting with emotions that the universal translator could not properly convey. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of nightmares that still visited him in sleep. New Haven was nothing, he began. A farming colony on the edge of human space with 30,000 civilians. No military bases, no strategic resources, no reason for anyone to care about it. The hegemony of Seattle chose it precisely because it was worthless. They wanted to send a message about human expansion, and they thought a defenseless agricultural world would be perfect for making their point. Vexathala had been part of the intelligence team that planned the invasion. The Seattle military had assigned 200,000 troops to what they expected would be a simple occupation. The plan was straightforward. Land, secure the major population centers, and wait for the humans to surrender rather than see their civilians harmed. We had studied every military engagement in galactic history, Vexathala continued. When faced with overwhelming force threatening their non-combatants, every species eventually yields. The mathematics are simple. You cannot fight a war when your enemy holds your children hostage. Colonel Ryan Murphy commanded the small human garrison on New Haven. He had fewer than 500 soldiers to defend an entire planet against 200,000 invaders. By every measure of military science, resistance was not just futile but criminally irresponsible. Murphy chose to fight anyway. The first thing that confused us was the civilian response, Vexathala told the council. When our forces landed and demanded surrender, the farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers of New Haven did something we had never seen before. They volunteered to join the resistance. John Kelly had been growing food on New Haven for 15 years. He had never fired a weapon in anger and had no military training whatsoever. When the Seattle forces arrived, he converted his agricultural equipment into weapons of war. Kelly turned his harvesting machines into armored vehicles, Vexathala said, disbelief still evident in his voice after 3 years. He welded metal plates onto farming equipment and mounted weapons taken from our dead soldiers. A machine designed to gather crops became a tank that could destroy our armored vehicles. The psychological impact was devastating. Seattle troops found themselves under attack from equipment they had never seen in combat before. Irrigation systems became delivery methods for chemical weapons. Grain silos became fortresses. Livestock pens became prisoner-holding areas. Teacher Laura Watson organized the colony's children into an intelligence network that tracked every movement of Seattle forces. Kids who should have been evacuated to safety instead volunteered to carry messages between resistance cells and report on enemy positions. Children were fighting us, Vexathala whispered. Human children, some no older than 10 standard years, were providing tactical information that resulted in the deaths of seasoned Seattle warriors. They were not forced to do this. They chose it. Dr. Eric Stone established field hospitals in abandoned mining tunnels beneath the colony. When Seattle forces bombed the surface medical facilities, expecting to break human morale by denying treatment to the wounded, they discovered that the humans had already moved their operations underground. Stone was treating injured resistance fighters while our artillery bombardment continued overhead, Vexathala said. He performed surgery using equipment salvaged from veterinary clinics and manufacturing plants. He saved lives using tools designed to repair machinery. The humans turned their knowledge of their own colony into a weapon. They knew every tunnel, every building, every hidden passage that Seattle intelligence had never discovered. They used the colony's infrastructure against the invaders in ways that no military academy had ever taught. Farmer Claire Adams had been growing food in underground hydroponic facilities. When the invasion began, she flooded entire districts of the colony by redirecting underground water systems. Seattle hover tanks that were designed to operate on solid ground found themselves struggling through marshlands that had been created overnight. We had superior technology and overwhelming numbers, Vexathala continued. But the humans knew their world better than our sensors could map it. Every advantage we possessed became meaningless when the battlefield itself was working against us. The siege lasted 8 months. The Seattle forces held most of the major population centers, but they could not control the countryside. Human resistance fighters struck at supply convoys, communication centers, and isolated outposts. Every day brought new casualties and no progress toward victory. Pilot Sam Garcia had been flying cargo transports for the colony's mining operations. When his civilian aircraft was shot down in the third month of the siege, the wreckage landed in the colony's main square. Instead of clearing away the debris, the human civilians turned it into a monument. They stripped the crashed ship for parts and equipment, Vexathala said, but they left the main hull intact and used it as a broadcasting station. Every day they transmitted messages of defiance across the planet. Cetal troops could hear human voices promising that the resistance would never surrender. The psychological warfare was more effective than any weapon. Cetal soldiers began reporting to medical officers with symptoms of severe stress and anxiety. Combat veterans who had fought in dozens of campaigns requested transfers off New Haven. Morale collapsed as the reality of the situation became clear. The humans were not trying to win, Vexathala explained to the council. They were trying to make the cost of victory too high for us to pay. Every day we stayed on New Haven, we lost more troops, more equipment, more will to continue fighting. Captain Lisa Turner led raids against Cetal supply depots using nothing but civilian volunteers and captured enemy weapons. Her forces included shopkeepers, mechanics, and retired grandparents who had never seen combat before the invasion. They attacked professional soldiers with improvised tactics and equipment that should not have worked. Turner's raiders destroyed more Cetal equipment in 1 month than we had lost in the previous year of galactic warfare, Vexathala said. They used knowledge of local terrain and weather patterns to predict our movements and set traps that our military advisors never anticipated. The breaking point came when the human resistance began targeting Cetal morale directly. They hacked into military communication networks and broadcast recordings of human music, specifically songs about ancient battles and warriors who had died fighting impossible odds. Mechanic Tony Martinez had rigged the colony's communication array to override Cetal military frequencies. Instead of transmitting tactical information, he played human war songs that told stories of heroes who had chosen death over surrender. The music was worse than any weapon, Vexathala whispered. Our troops could not stop listening to it. They began to understand that the humans were not afraid of dying. They were afraid of living as slaves. This concept was completely alien to Cetal psychology. The final straw came when engineer Helen Price led a group of civilian volunteers in an attack on the main Cetal command center. They used industrial equipment and mining charges to break through fortifications that had been designed to withstand military assault. Price's attack killed 50 of our officers and destroyed our primary communication hub, Vexathala said. But the tactical victory was less important than the symbolic one. A group of human civilians had penetrated the most secure facility on the planet using tools from their own workshops. The hegemony of Cetal finally ordered a withdrawal after losing 12,000 troops without achieving any strategic objectives. The cost in equipment and morale was threatening the stability of their entire military structure. We retreated not because we could not take the colony, Vexathala concluded, but because holding it would have destroyed our ability to fight anywhere else. The humans had turned their own defeat into our catastrophe. The alien survivor looked around the council chamber with eyes that had seen the impossible become routine. New Haven was a farming colony with no strategic value, he said quietly. But the humans defended it like it was the center of their civilization. Every civilian became a combatant. Every building became a fortress. Every defeat became motivation for continued resistance. Vexathala paused and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That was when I began to understand the true nature of human warfare. They do not fight for territory or resources or strategic advantage. They fight for the right to exist as free beings, and a species that fights for freedom will endure any cost, accept any sacrifice, and continue any battle rather than surrender that freedom to someone else. The council chamber fell silent as the implications of Vexathala's words settled over. The assembled representatives and across the galaxy, human colonies continued to grow under the protection of citizens who would rather die than yield. Vexathala's fourth account began with a tremor in his voice that grew stronger as he spoke. The alien's skin had taken on an even paler shade, and his breathing patterns indicated stress levels that concerned the council's medical monitors. But He continued speaking, driven by a need to warn the galaxy about what he had witnessed. The Corvani High Command created a special task force to hunt down what the humans called Ghost Squadron. Vexthala began. I was chosen to lead the intelligence division because of my previous experience with human tactics. It was considered a prestigious assignment. We were hunting 12 human pilots who flew obsolete civilian ships and had no major military backing. The alien paused and looked directly at the Council's Supreme Commander. We assigned 3 full battle groups to this mission. Over 15,000 experienced warriors dedicated to capturing or destroying a dozen humans and modified cargo haulers. The mathematics suggested we would succeed within weeks. Major Alex Turner commanded Ghost Squadron from a ship that had originally been designed to transport mining equipment between asteroid fields. The vessel had no military armor, no advanced weapons systems, and no sophisticated defense mechanisms. Turner had stripped out everything except the basic life support and engines, then filled the extra space with salvaged equipment and improvised weapons. Our first encounter with Ghost Squadron occurred near the Vega system, Vexthala continued. They attacked a Corvani supply convoy that was protected by 6 escort vessels, 12 human pilots in converted civilian ships against a professional military formation. We expected the battle to last minutes. Lieutenant Sam Garcia flew a ship that had once carried agricultural products between farming colonies. He had removed the cargo holds and installed missile launchers made from salvaged military hardware. His vessel looked like a flying scrapyard, but it moved like a predator hunting prey. Garcia's attack pattern made no tactical sense, Vexthala said, confusion still evident in his voice. He flew directly at our largest escort ship, ignoring the obvious defensive fire that should have destroyed him instantly. Our gunners locked onto his ship and prepared to eliminate the threat. What the Corvani forces did not understand was that Garcia's apparent suicide run was actually a carefully calculated maneuver. His ship's improvised armor was designed to absorb just enough damage to convince enemy gunners that they were winning, while protecting the vital systems long enough for him to reach his target. He crashed his ship into our fuel depot, Vexthala whispered. But this was not a desperate ramming attack. Garcia had rigged his vessel to penetrate the depot's hull and detonate his remaining missiles inside the fuel storage area. The explosion destroyed the entire supply convoy and created a chain reaction that damaged 2 of the escort vessels. But more importantly, Garcia had transmitted detailed tactical data about Corvani defensive patterns to the rest of Ghost Squadron before his ship was destroyed. The other human pilots used Garcia's sacrifice to coordinate simultaneous attacks on our remaining escorts, Vexthala continued. Within minutes, our entire convoy was destroyed or disabled. 11 human pilots had eliminated a military formation that should have been impossible for them to defeat. Captain Ruth Baker commanded a ship that had originally transported medical supplies to remote colonies. She had converted the cargo bays into workshops where she manufactured weapons and equipment using industrial tools and salvaged materials. Baker's ship was a flying weapons factory, Vexthala explained. She could repair damaged systems, manufacture new ammunition, and modify equipment while moving at full combat speed. The humans had turned logistics into a weapon. The psychological impact of Ghost Squadron went far beyond their tactical successes. Corvani supply officers began requesting additional escorts for routine missions. Patrol commanders altered their routes to avoid areas where the human pilots might be operating. The mere possibility of encountering Ghost Squadron was enough to disrupt military operations across 3 star systems. The humans used our fear against us, Vexthala said. They did not need to attack every convoy or patrol. Just knowing that they might be anywhere was enough to force us to divert resources from offensive operations to defensive measures. Pilot Eric Stone flew a ship that had been designed for asteroid mining operations. The vessel's industrial cutting lasers had been modified into weapons that could slice through military armor like paper. Stone used his ship's mining equipment to tear apart Corvani vessels from the inside. Stone would approach our ships pretending to be disabled, Vexthala continued. When we moved to capture him, he would use the mining manipulators to grab onto our hull and then activate the cutting lasers. He turned industrial equipment into surgical instruments for destroying warships. The hunt for Ghost Squadron became an obsession for the Corvani military. They assigned their best pilots and most advanced ships to the mission, but the humans seemed to always stay one step ahead of their pursuers. Commander Tony Martinez flew a ship that had once carried passengers between civilian space stations. He had removed all the luxury amenities and installed sensor equipment that allowed him to monitor Corvani communications from incredible distances. Martinez knew where our ships would be before our own commanders issued the orders, Vex Thala said. He had hacked into our communication networks and was reading our battle plans in real time. The humans were fighting with complete knowledge of our strategies and movements. The breaking point came when Ghost Squadron infiltrated the major Corvani naval base at Proxima Station. Instead of attempting to destroy ships or facilities, they focused on psychological warfare that shattered the morale of the entire base. Pilot Claire Adams had managed to penetrate the base's computer systems and taken control of the communication arrays. She used the base's own speakers to broadcast human music directly into the quarters where Corvani troops were trying to sleep. The music was not random, Vexathala whispered. Adams had researched Corvani psychology and chosen specific human songs that would have the maximum psychological impact on our species. She played war chants and battle hymns that told stories of humans who had died fighting overwhelming odds. The effect on Corvani morale was devastating. Troops who had never shown fear in combat began reporting to medical officers with anxiety disorders. 3 entire companies requested transfers to other assignments, claiming that they could not continue to serve on a base that had been psychologically compromised. The humans had weaponized our own imagination, Vexthala explained to the council. They made us afraid not just of what they might do, but of what we might become if we continued fighting them. The music told stories of warriors who chose death over surrender, and our troops began to wonder if they had that same courage. Captain Helen Price commanded the final Ghost Squadron mission that Vexthala witnessed personally. She led an attack on a Corvani fleet repair facility using tactics that violated every principle of space combat that the galaxy had ever developed. Price approached our facility in a ship that was broadcasting civilian identification codes, Vexthala said. She requested permission to dock for emergency repairs, claiming that her vessel had suffered engine damage during a meteor shower. The Corvani facility commander granted permission for the civilian ship to dock, expecting to provide routine assistance to a damaged vessel. Instead, Price's ship was filled with explosives and programmed to detonate once it was inside the facility's defensive perimeter. Price evacuated to an escape pod just before her ship exploded, Vexthala continued. The blast destroyed the main repair dock and damaged 6 Corvani vessels that were undergoing maintenance. But the most terrifying part was what happened next. The escape pod that Price had used was equipped with long-range communication equipment. As Corvani rescue teams approached to capture her, she transmitted a final message that was received by human forces throughout the sector. She gave detailed intelligence about our fleet positions, our repair schedules, and our defensive weaknesses, Vexthala said. Price had sacrificed her ship and her freedom to provide other human forces with the information they needed to continue the war. The Corvani High Command finally abandoned the hunt for Ghost Squadron after losing 200 ships and over 30,000 personnel in their attempts to capture or destroy 12 human pilots. We declared victory and claimed that Ghost Squadron had been eliminated, Vexthala concluded, but the truth was that we could no longer afford to continue the hunt. The humans had turned our own military strength against us, forcing us to divert enormous resources to defensive operations that produced no strategic benefit. The alien survivor looked around the council chamber with eyes that reflected the futility of trying to fight an enemy that turned every disadvantage into opportunity. Ghost Squadron taught us that humans do not fight to destroy their enemies, he said quietly. They fight to make their enemies destroy themselves. Every battle becomes a lesson. Every defeat becomes intelligence for the next engagement. Every sacrifice becomes a weapon for future warriors. Vexathala paused and his voice dropped to barely audible levels. The 12 pilots of Ghost Squadron killed more Corvani warriors than some of our largest battle fleets. Vexthala's breathing became heavier as he prepared to tell the council about his second encounter with human warfare. The alien's hands clenched into fists as the memories returned. and several council members noticed his body temperature dropping on their sensors. The Corvani called it the Battle of Centauri Prime, Vexathala said slowly. I was serving as a liaison officer aboard their flagship when we encountered a single human destroyer. One ship against 50 of our most powerful vessels. The mathematics were simple. The humans had no chance. The alien paused and looked directly at the Council's military advisor, a seasoned veteran from the Altarian species. Have you ever seen a creature smile as it dies? Have you ever watched someone turn their own death into a weapon? Because that is what humans do, and it is the most terrifying thing in the universe. Commander Lisa Brooks stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant as the massive Corvani battle fleet surrounded her ship. Her vessel was barely 300 meters long compared to the Corvani flagship that stretched over 2 kilometers. Her crew numbered only 120 souls, while the enemy fleet carried over 50,000 warriors. Our scanners showed her ship was damaged, Vexathala continued. Their engines were running at 60% power and their main weapons were offline. Any rational commander would have surrendered immediately. Instead, Commander Brooks opened a communication channel to our entire fleet. The human commander appeared on screens across the Corvani fleet. She was a small woman with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to look through the camera directly at each alien warrior watching. She said only 4 words, Vexathala whispered. Remember this moment. Then she cut the transmission and began her attack run straight at our flagship. The Corvani fleet prepared for the easiest victory in their military history. They powered up their main guns and locked targeting systems onto the approaching human ship, 50 vessels against 1 damaged destroyer. The battle should have lasted seconds. We were watching our sensors when something impossible happened, Vexathala said. The human ship began accelerating beyond what their damaged engines should have allowed. Our weapons officers reported that Commander Brooks had somehow overloaded her reactor to increase power output. She was turning her ship into a bomb. The Corvani fleet opened fire with everything they had. Thousands of energy beams and projectiles filled the space between the fleets. The human ship took hit after hit, its shields failing and armor burning away. But it kept coming. That was when we realized the ramming attack was not the real threat. Vexathala continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. As their ship approached our flagship, it began ejecting every missile it carried, not firing them, just pushing them out into space like garbage. Lieutenant Sam Garcia was the human weapons officer aboard the Defiant. As his ship died around him, he manually programmed each missile with individual targeting data. 50 missiles against 50 ships. The Corvani fleet was so focused on the dramatic ramming attack that they barely noticed the small weapons floating in space behind the human destroyer. The missiles activated their engines when Commander Brooks triggered her reactor overload, Vexathala said. 50 guided weapons, each one aimed at a specific target, each one carrying enough explosive power to cripple a capital ship. The explosion of the UES Defiant lit up space like a new star. The blast destroyed the Corvani flagship instantly and damaged a dozen nearby vessels. But that was only the beginning. The 50 missiles that Garcia had programmed struck their targets within seconds of each other. 12 more Corvani ships exploded outright while 20 others suffered critical damage. In less than a minute, the mighty Corvani fleet had lost over half its firepower to a single damaged human destroyer. We thought it was over, Vexathala told the council. We were wrong again. As the Corvani survivors tried to regroup and assess their losses, their sensors detected something that should have been impossible. Small objects were moving through the debris field where the human ship had exploded, objects that were giving off human life signs. Chief Engineer Tony Martinez had spent the final hour before the battle preparing escape pods for the entire human crew. But these were not ordinary evacuation vehicles. Martinez had removed all safety systems and comfort features to make room for additional equipment. Each pod carried a human crew member and an emergency beacon, Vexathala explained. But the beacons were not calling for rescue. They were calling for revenge. The human battle group that answered those distress signals arrived just as the Corvani were trying to repair their damaged ships. 6 heavy cruisers and 2 battleships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately opened fire on the scattered alien fleet. Captain Ruth Baker commanded the human reinforcements. She had received the distress signals from the escape pods and used them to coordinate the most devastating surprise attack in galactic military history. The humans in the escape pods had been transmitting detailed information about our ship, positions, our damage levels, and our repair efforts, Vexathala said. Commander Brooks had not just sacrificed her ship to damage our fleet. She had turned her entire crew into intelligence assets for the next wave of attackers. The fresh human ships struck like predators attacking wounded prey. They targeted the most damaged Corvani vessels first, finishing them off before they could complete repairs. Then they moved on to the ships that were still combat capable, using superior tactics and positioning to destroy them one by one. But the most terrifying part was still to come. The human ship's computer systems had survived the reactor explosion. Vexathala continued, his voice shaking with remembered fear. Chief Martinez had programmed them to continue fighting even after the crew abandoned ship. Pieces of the destroyed UES Defiant began moving through space under their own power. The ship's computer had taken control of any debris that still had working systems. Weapon components, sensor arrays, and propulsion units reassembled themselves into makeshift attack drones. The ghost of their ship was hunting us, Vexathala whispered. Fragments of metal and circuit boards flying through space, targeting our escape pods and rescue shuttles. The humans had turned death itself into a weapon. Pilot Helen Price was one of the humans who had escaped in the modified pods. Instead of waiting for rescue, she used her pod's limited maneuvering systems to hunt down damaged Corvani fighters. Her tiny escape vessel carried no weapons, so she used it as a guided missile, ramming enemy ships that were trying to flee the battle. The psychological effect on the surviving Corvani was complete. Warriors who had spent their lives in space combat began refusing orders. Some abandoned their posts entirely. Others simply sat in their quarters and waited for death. We had started that battle with 50 ships and 50,000 warriors, Vexathala told the council. When it ended, we had 7 damaged vessels and less than 3,000 survivors. The humans had lost 1 destroyer and gained a victory that would be talked about for generations. The alien survivor looked around the council chamber with haunted eyes. But the worst part was not the tactical defeat. It was the realization that the humans had planned this outcome from the beginning. Commander Brooks had not stumbled into a desperate battle. She had deliberately sought out our fleet with a damaged ship and a small crew, because she knew that her death would accomplish more than her survival. Vexathala paused and took a shuddering breath. The humans had turned martyrdom into military doctrine. They had weaponized sacrifice itself. Every death made them stronger, every loss became a lesson for the next battle. We were not fighting a military force. We were fighting a species that had learned how to win by losing. The council chamber remained silent as the weight of Vexathala's words settled over the assembled representatives. Across the galaxy, humanity continued its expansion, and somewhere in space, the ghost signals from human ships continued to broadcast their eternal message of defiance. Vexathala's hands shook as he stood before the Galactic Council. The alien's blue skin had turned pale gray, and his 4 eyes darted around the chamber like a creature still haunted by nightmares. When he spoke, his voice cracked with fear that had not faded even after 3 years. "You want to know why we lost?" Vexathala said to the assembled representatives. "You want to understand how 12 humans held off 3,000 of our finest warriors. I was there. I saw it happen. I still dream about it every night." The council chamber fell silent. Representatives from dozens of species leaned forward, in their seats. They had all heard rumors about the humans, but few had witnessed their warfare firsthand. Vexathala took a deep breath and began his story. It was supposed to be simple. Kepler 442b was a mining planet with no military value. Our intelligence said only a small human survey team was working there. 12 soldiers and some mining equipment. We brought 3 battlecruisers and 3,000 elite Zephyrian troops. The humans had nowhere to run and no way to call for help. It should have been over in hours. The alien's voice grew quieter. "We were so wrong," Captain Jake Morrison was the human commander on Kepler 442b. He was not a large man by human standards, but when the Zephyrian ships appeared in orbit, he did something that made no sense to any military mind in the galaxy. Instead of surrendering or trying to hide, he smiled. Our thermal scanners picked up that smile, Vexathala continued. We thought it was fear making him crazy. We had no idea that humans smile when they are about to do something impossible. The first Zephyrian landing craft touched down near the human mining base. 200 elite warriors poured out, expecting to find frightened humans waiting to surrender. Instead, they found empty buildings and silence. Then the explosion started. Lieutenant Amy Carter had spent the night before the invasion turning mining charges into bombs. She placed them in every building, every tunnel, and every piece of equipment. When the Zephyrian troops entered the base, she triggered them all at once. The blast killed 50 of our warriors instantly, Vexathala said, his voice shaking. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the laughter. We could hear the humans laughing over our radio frequencies. They were enjoying this. The surviving Zephyrian troops regrouped and began hunting for the humans. They expected to find them hiding in caves or trying to escape to the far side of the planet. Instead, they found that the humans had turned the entire mining complex into a trap. Sergeant Ben Davis had positioned himself in the main tunnel that connected all the mining shafts. He had a single automatic rifle and enough ammunition for maybe an hour of fighting. Any sane creature would have tried to find a better position or retreat to fight another day. Ben Davis stayed in that tunnel for 18 hours. He held that position alone against wave after wave of our best troops, Vexathala told the council. We sent 50 warriors at a time. They would charge down that tunnel, and none of them would come back. We could see him on our thermal scanners, bleeding from multiple wounds, but he would not move. He would not retreat. He just kept shooting. The humans used the planet itself as a weapon. Kepler 442b was a harsh world with extreme weather and dangerous terrain. The Zephyrians had environmental suits and advanced equipment to deal with these conditions. The humans threw all of that away and learned to live with the danger. Private Lisa Brooks spent 3 days crawling through acid rain to reach a Zephyrian supply depot. Her skin was burned, her equipment was ruined, and she was barely alive when she arrived. She used her last grenade to destroy enough supplies to feed 500 warriors for a week. Corporal Tony Martinez found a way to turn the planet's magnetic field into a weapon. He rigged the mining equipment to create electromagnetic pulses that disabled Zephyrian communications and targeting systems. Every time the aliens tried to coordinate an attack, their equipment would fail. We had technology that was centuries ahead of theirs, Vexathala said. Our weapons were more powerful. Our armor was stronger. Our ships could destroy their entire planet. But none of that mattered because the humans fought like they were already dead. The Zephyrians tried everything. They bombed the mining complex from orbit, but the humans had moved into natural caves. They used chemical weapons, but the humans had already been living in toxic conditions. They brought in specialized tracking equipment, but the humans knew the terrain better than any scanner could map. On the third day, Private Ryan Murphy carried out an attack that broke the Zephyrian morale completely. He strapped explosives to Way himself and walked into a group of 50 Zephyrian soldiers. When they tried to capture him, he triggered the bombs. He looked at our troops and smiled. Vexathala whispered. Then he said something in human language that our translators picked up. He said, "See you in hell," and then everything went white. The psychological effect was devastating. Zephyrian warriors who had fought in dozens of battles began refusing orders. They had never encountered an enemy that seemed happy to die as long as they could take some enemies with them. Captain Morrison spent the entire battle moving between positions, appearing wherever his troops needed him most. He was wounded 7 times but refused medical treatment. Every time the Zephyrians thought they had cornered him, he would disappear and show up somewhere else. On the 6th day, Sergeant Eric Stone made radio contact with a human fleet that was still 3 days away. Instead of waiting for rescue, he asked for permission to continue the fight. Continue what fight? Vexathala asked the council, his voice breaking. They had no food, no clean water, and most of them were wounded. Their equipment was broken, and their ammunition was almost gone. Any military force in the galaxy would have considered the battle over. But the humans wanted to keep fighting. The Zephyrian commander finally made the decision that saved what was left of his force. He ordered a full retreat. 3,000 elite warriors fled from 12 humans who should have been dead days ago. We lost 800 troops in 6 days, Vex Thala concluded. The humans lost nobody. When the human fleet arrived, all 12 of them were still alive and still ready to fight. The alien survivor looked around the council chamber with haunted eyes. That was when I realized we were not fighting soldiers. We were fighting something that evolution had spent millions of years creating. Every human is born ready for war. They do not just fight to win, they fight because fighting is what they are. The council chamber remained silent as Vexathala's words echoed through the hall, and across the galaxy, humanity continued its quiet expansion to the stars. For his final account, Vexthala stood completely still for nearly 5 minutes. The council chamber waited in absolute silence as the alien survivor gathered the strength to relive the most terrifying day in galactic history. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of witnessing the impossible become reality. The Battle of Nexus was supposed to end the human threat forever. Vexthala began. Every major species in the galaxy contributed ships and personnel to the largest military alliance in recorded history. 10,000 vessels from 47 different civilizations, all united in the goal of eliminating humanity before they could spread further into our territories. The alien's hands shook as he continued. I was a prisoner aboard the human flagship UES Retribution when Admiral Kevin Walsh prepared to face this overwhelming force with fewer than 800 ships. The humans were outnumbered more than 12 to 1, and their vessels were centuries behind our technology. Every military computer in the galaxy calculated the same result. The humans would be completely destroyed within hours. Admiral Walsh had spent 3 years preparing for this battle, but not in the way that any galactic military academy would have taught. Instead of building more ships or developing better weapons, he had focused on something that no other species had ever considered. He had learned how to use the universe itself as a weapon. The human fleet arrived at Nexus in a formation that made no tactical sense. Vexathala continued. Their ships were spread out over millions of kilometers, far too distant to provide mutual support or concentrate their firepower. Our analysts assumed that Walsh was either incompetent or insane. Commander Pete Johnson commanded a squadron of 12 human vessels that looked like they had been cobbled together from spare parts and industrial equipment. His ships carried no visible weapons and showed no signs of military modification. The Galactic Alliance fleet dismissed them as support vessels, or perhaps civilian refugees trying to escape the coming battle. Johnson's ships were equipped with devices that our scientists said were impossible, Vexathala said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The humans had built artificial black hole generators, weapons that could manipulate gravity itself. Our physicists had warned that such technology was too dangerous to construct, let alone use in combat. The battle began exactly as every computer model had predicted. The Galactic Alliance fleet opened fire with thousands of weapons, creating a storm of energy and projectiles that should have obliterated the human forces in minutes. But the humans did not try to fight this battle using conventional tactics. Captain Helen Price commanded a human vessel that appeared to be nothing more than a modified cargo ship. When the Alliance fleet opened fire, she activated devices that created gravitational anomalies throughout the battle zone. Energy beams bent away from their targets, missiles were pulled off course, and entire sections of the Alliance fleet found themselves caught in artificial gravity wells. The humans had turned space itself into their ally, Vexthala explained to the stunned council. They were not just fighting with ships and weapons, they were fighting with the fundamental forces of the universe. Engineer Lisa Martinez had spent 2 years developing weapons that could destabilize stellar fusion processes. Her ship carried devices that could reach across millions of kilometers to disrupt the nuclear reactions that powered stars. When the Alliance fleet positioned itself near the Nexus system's primary star, Martinez activated her equipment. The star began to fluctuate, Vexthala said, terror still evident in his voice after 3 years. Its energy output increased, dramatically, then decreased, then spiked again. The humans had turned our own sun into a weapon that threatened every ship in the system. The psychological impact on the Galactic Alliance was immediate and catastrophic. Crews that had volunteered to fight an advanced military force found themselves facing enemies who could manipulate the laws of physics. Panic spread through the fleet as commanders tried to understand how to fight an enemy that could weaponize space-time itself. Pilot Tony Garcia flew a ship that had been designed around a single experimental weapon. His vessel could create temporary rifts in the fabric of reality, allowing him to move instantly from one location to another without crossing the space between. Garcia used this ability to appear inside the enemy formation and attack from positions that should have been impossible to reach. Garcia's ship would vanish from our sensors and then reappear inside our defensive lines. Vexathala continued. He could strike at our most protected vessels and disappear before we could respond. The humans had learned how to teleport through space itself. Admiral Walsh coordinated the battle from his flagship, but he was not commanding a traditional military engagement. Instead, he was conducting what could only be described as a symphony of destruction that used the fundamental forces of nature as instruments. Colonel Sam Davis commanded human vessels that carried weapons designed to manipulate electromagnetic fields on a stellar scale. His ships could create artificial aurora effects that disrupted communication and navigation systems across the entire battle zone. Alliance commanders found themselves unable to coordinate their attacks or even communicate with their own forces. The humans had turned the battlefield into chaos, Vexathala said. Our superior numbers meant nothing when we could not organize our attacks. Our advanced technology was useless when the basic laws of physics were being rewritten around us. The turning point came when Captain Eric Stone activated the most terrifying weapon that any galactic species had ever witnessed. His ship began generating a cascade effect that destabilized the quantum structure of space itself within a limited area. Ships caught in Stone's weapon simply ceased to exist, Vexathala whispered. They did not explode or burn or break apart. They just stopped being real. The humans had found a way to delete matter from the universe. The Galactic Alliance fleet began to break apart, as commanders realized that they were not fighting a military force, but rather a species that had learned to wage war using the fundamental building blocks of reality. Ships began fleeing the battle zone without orders, and entire squadrons abandoned their positions. But the humans were not finished. Captain Ruth Turner commanded a vessel that could manipulate time itself within a localized area. She used this ability to slow down enemy movements while allowing human forces to operate at normal speed. From the perspective of Alliance observers, the human ships seemed to move with impossible quickness while their own vessels struggled through what felt like thick liquid. Turner could make seconds last for hours or compress hours into seconds, Vexathala said. The humans were fighting a battle where time moved at their command. We could not aim our weapons at targets that existed in different temporal frames. The final horror came when Admiral Walsh activated the ultimate human weapon. His flagship began generating a field effect that caused stars throughout the Nexus system to begin collapsing into black holes. Walsh was willing to destroy the entire star system to win the battle, Vexathala told the council. He was prepared to sacrifice everything, including his own forces, rather than allow the Galactic Alliance to survive the encounter. The realization that the humans were willing to commit stellar genocide to protect their species broke the remaining morale of the Alliance fleet. Commanders who had come to eliminate a primitive threat found themselves facing enemies who would rather destroy the universe than accept defeat. Pilot Claire Adams transmitted the final human message of the battle. Her ship was heavily damaged and her life support was failing, but she managed to broadcast a statement that was received across the entire galaxy. She said that this was what happened when anyone threatened human children. Vexathala concluded. Adams told the galaxy to remember this moment and warned that humanity would do anything, sacrifice anything, and destroy anything, rather than allow their species to be enslaved or eliminated. The battle ended with both fleets largely destroyed, but the strategic victory belonged to humanity. The Galactic Alliance had committed their finest ships and most experienced personnel to the battle, and had been defeated by an enemy that fought with weapons that should not have existed. The humans won because they understood something that we never learned, Vexathala said as he prepared to finish his testimony. They understood that some things are worth destroying the universe to protect. They fought not just for victory, but for the right to exist as free beings, and they were willing to pay any price to secure that freedom. The alien survivor looked around the council chamber with eyes that had seen the foundations of reality, used as weapons of war. "This is my final warning to the Galactic Council," he said quietly. "Humanity has learned how to wage war using the fundamental forces of nature. They can manipulate gravity, time, space, and matter itself. They have weapons that can delete ships from existence and turn stars into bombs." Vexathala paused and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But their most dangerous weapon is not any technology or device. Their most dangerous weapon is their absolute refusal to accept defeat. They will sacrifice everything, destroy anything, and break the laws of physics themselves rather than surrender their freedom to anyone else."